Hi, friends. Welcome back to this episode of Complaint Free Life. And I want to talk to you today about one of the other ways that we could be sabotaging ourselves. And I was talking about it yesterday in the live session for transitioning humanitarians, and it seems like it was received so well. And I thought that I should continue that topic because it's one of those topics that it's like we don't want to be doing things because we know it's not good for us, but we keep doing it anyway. And that's what I call sabotage. Don't worry, we don't do things on purpose. It's just that I think a lot of the times we get confused, we are vague about it, or we just think that this is just how things are. Or we don't even realize that we're doing it, right? So, like I was saying yesterday, so today, one of those topics is the boundaries that we want to talk about. And I think there are so many ways that we could talk about it. I try to like condense it as much as possible. So be aware that if you want to deepen this topic and if you want to work on it specifically considering your unique situation, then you should absolutely come join me in my lab for transitioning humanitarians, where we'll be talking a lot about this as well, because it's one of the reasons why we don't tend to enjoy living life the way we want to, because we don't feel like we're good at setting boundaries, or we don't feel like we can do that, or we feel like it's not really something that's like for me. I am like the exception, or I don't belong to that culture, or whatever we may say to ourselves, and then therefore we don't really do it. So that's why I really, really encourage you to come to work with me in my lab for transitioning humanitarians. And the registration is going on and it's finishing on 26th of September. So until then, please go visit my new website, estellahormonova.com, and you will find all the information under the group coaching. Okay. So let's talk about boundaries. And the way that I want to divide my thinking around it so that you follow what I'm talking about into two parts. The first part is why it's not working currently, right? Let's imagine that you have tried it. Let's imagine that you have heard about it and you think it's a great idea and you've tried it and it's not working. So let's talk a bit more about why it's not working and how to make it work. So these are the two things. Now, just for anyone who's new to this conversation around boundaries, I just want to clarify that it's a bit like you having a house and there is a fence around it, or there is like a line around it if you don't have a fence, line around that says this is your territory and everything else is outside. It's a bit like that type of boundary, only with you and your being, your life, the way you function. There is always this line that you draw and you don't go beyond, right? This is the idea. So boundaries could be understood in so many ways, but I think the main two things that we often talk about um, in the humanitarian world, but in general as well, I think one is the general boundaries, meaning that we set boundaries as to these are the hours I work and these are the hours I don't work, or these are the ways I function and these are the ways I don't, right? So this could be like the general thing of this is how I function, could be a boundary, but also, excuse me, boundary could be a case by case or specific situation related boundary. For instance, your boss is shouting at you. Let's imagine like the worst case scenario. I don't think people do that, but or another one is a good one. I think that your boss is passive aggressive or your boss is aggressive, but trying to hold himself or herself so hard so that he or she does not shoot out and say things, right? This is when you might want to put a boundary because it doesn't um, contribute to the conversation, right? It doesn't make the conversation better or easier. So this might be the situation where you may say that I do not want to uh, have this conversation in this moment where you seem to be feeling certain intense emotions, and that's why let's continue this conversation when you're ready to do that, and that's absolutely fine, right? So this is the boundaries if we did that on case by case basis. Another way that parents could think of is like boundaries of children are allowed to do XYZ, they're not allowed to do XYZ, and if they do, then this is a consequence. This is a boundary. In other words, boundary always has a request component and the consequence component. And we'll dive into that more in detail when we talk about how to make it work. But now let me dive into why it's not working. Okay. I'm sure you already know this, but I just wanted to like, what is the word I'm looking for? Structure it and present it to you and reflect back to you. Maybe that will like resonate with you more, because whenever I have other people reflect back to me what I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my God, is that what I'm thinking? Or is that what I'm doing? So that's why this is all I want to do. So the first reason I have been observing, so these are all observations from my own life and from my client's life, right? So the first thing that I observe is because we tend to set boundaries when we have a very intense emotion. If we're talking about case by case boundary, like, right? So for instance, if let's say that we are conversing with another human being, let's say that human being is a boss, and that boss said something and that made us angry, or that made us upset, or that made us resentful, if we haven't really processed previous emotions towards that person, right? And then in that moment we then feel like, okay, I can't handle this anymore, I don't want to be handling this anymore, or whatever, and then we just say out things, don't do this to me, or how can you do this to me, or whatever the way that we like shout back or react to whatever he or she's saying. And in that moment, that we think that's a boundary, but actually it's just a reactionary feeling. We're just like reacting to things without really having things thought through, or without really like wanting to being able to take care of ourselves in that moment, right? Because we're just reacting to it, and we believe that that's a boundary. But what happens in that moment, unfortunately, is that we tend to always generate in other people the mirror reaction. Well, not always, but most of the time. In other words, if we are reacting that way, the other person will react similar way, and therefore the other person is not in a position to listen and hear us, because he or she is already pissed, like you are. So if we have two people pissed, obviously no one's listening to each other. That's how it is. So, and that's why the boundary doesn't work, because next time that person's going to continue doing it, whatever he or she was doing, and you continue reacting to it as well, and therefore the boundary will never function. That brings me to another point, is that in that moment when you are feeling that, it's likely that you are not very clear, and that's okay, because when we feel those things, we're not clear. I mean, me including. When I get pissed, I don't even know what I'm saying. Do you know what I mean? So that's why whenever we're pissed, or whenever we're upset, we're angry, we tend not to be clear. Our judgment gets clouded, and that's supposed to be that way, because those feelings are so strong that they steer us to focus on fighting or fleeing, right? So that's normal. So that's why in that moment, what you can do best is take care of yourself, process that, because once you process it, then the clarity arises. I think I'm already talking about what to do, but I just want to mention these things in the time when you're thinking about it, right? But we will come back to that as well. So why the boundary does not work is because we are vague about it. And we may also be vague about it even if we're not experiencing these heavy emotions. We may be vague about it even when we're like in our work, going around in our normal lives, right? I mean, I'm so surprised how vague I can be sometimes, even though I consider myself clear person, but sometimes when I say or write things and then I get some question from other people, from my readers, and I'm like, oh my God, I could have written it even more clear, apparently. Anyway, do you see what I'm saying? Is that our brains tend to be vague about things. So that's why what we really want, ideally, is request something. And if the person doesn't do it, this is the consequences. If the person does do it, this is the consequences. Could be the ideal way of setting boundary. Now, of course, we're not walking around living our lives like a textbook. That's not the purpose. And all of what I'm saying will come with practice. And some of the times, or probably most of the times, like if you're me, we'll be saying things without really having processed emotions, and that's okay. We're just wanting to practice it, right? So all I'm advocating is that be aware of how things are now, and how could you make things differently by changing small things at a time. So we don't need to go all the way to perfectionist, and we can't, and that's not the purpose either. So our job is to get aware of why boundaries are not working currently in your situation and what can you do differently to make it work. Another one is we don't tend to set boundaries on time. And this, I think, often concerns the general boundary setting. For instance, we don't tend to set boundaries as to how many hours we work in the workplace, or how many hours we are, even if not working in the workplace, like working from home, or if even thinking about working the whole time, right? We tend to be a lot like, even if we're not working, we keep thinking about it. We can't rest, and we keep like strategizing about things. All of that counts still as a work. And how we're not setting those boundaries because we have just developed the habit of working like 24/7, or of course I'm exaggerating, but working a lot of the hours, and then setting boundaries become difficult because we have developed that habit so much. And our brain is like, well, this is how we've been functioning. If you want to function differently, you need to be very consistent. And that's where the next point is, we're not consistent when we set boundaries. So for instance, we say, well, I'm going to work only on working days, fine, 24/7, whatever, but on weekend, I don't work at all, right? We get very excited, we set the boundary, and then the next thing you know, your boss is writing you a message saying, can you please have a look at this? Because your boss hasn't known that you have set this boundary for yourself. Now, what often tends to happen, of course, that we are very generous humanitarians who love saying yes to people, me including, so don't worry. Saying no feels like, I don't know, the world comes to an end, right? So we love saying yes to those messages, and then we start working on that thing, and then boundaries out of the window. Okay. That's why consistency is required. And all of this may be coming from a self-concept issue. Why it's not working, meaning that maybe somewhere we're fearing that if we say no, things will fall apart. If we say no, things will deteriorate so much. Or maybe another way of looking at it is, I can't really set these boundaries because I'm not good at it, or I'm not worthy of it, or I don't deserve it, or I should be working all the time because I'm paid so much, or because I'm a humanitarian and people are suffering, or all the other reasons behind in the background why we're not setting boundaries. And that's why it's not working. Now, the consequences of those, why boundaries don't work, I don't even need to tell you. But some of the things that to name is that we never get to rest. We never get to be treated the way we want to. We don't get to balance our lives in the way that is healthy. And we continue thinking about all of these things a lot and keep generating the feeling of resentment, feeling of tiredness, feeling of fear. And we will never live our lives essentially the way we want to. And then it leads to burnout, it leads to depression or other consequences that we well aware of, that I have suffered through myself several times. And we don't want to get to that part, right? That's the goal of setting boundaries, is not to be making us burn out, not to be letting us get into depression, not to let their work, for instance, or whoever that we're setting boundary against or towards, not let them take the joy away or influence our lives so much that we don't function the way that we want to, or we don't live the way we want to. Okay, I think I've described the why it's not working and what the consequences of that is. And now let's dive into how to make it work. Now, I see oftentimes that boundaries have, excuse me, the messages keep coming. Okay, the boundaries have at least 4 layers that we need to be aware of. And of course, I'm just saying it for the sake of dissect it even further and look at it even further in detail, right? I'm not saying it to scare you away or to say, oh my God, there's so much to do and I can't do it. So don't worry about it. It's actually very, very simple. But I want you to just have a look at the dissection of what's behind it or what are the elements of it, right? So there is the element of the thought level where we think about in reaction to someone said something or in reaction to our work, that we have our thoughts about, I don't want to be doing this way, or I choose not to do this way, I want to do something else, right? Or I am this person who does things this way now, right? All of these thoughts are amazing. And we want to just get clear as to what that means. And then the next level is the feeling level, where we want to be very honest with ourselves. The honesty is, I think, the biggest requirement for setting boundary, if you ask me. Maybe other people have other experiences, but the way that I have experienced, like every time, is the honesty with yourself and honesty with others. So, in other words, that we're not setting boundary to punish other people. That's very important. We're not setting boundary to make them go away or to start a fight, right? We're setting a boundary to show to other people what is our wish, what is our way of doing things, what is our rules, what is our principles, right? We are only doing that. Boundary is there to help us realize these are my ways of doing things or the ways of being. And if other people cross it or encroach it, then this is the consequence. Okay, so that's why it's very important that we're honest. And another requirement for setting boundary is that we do it out of freedom within, meaning that we don't do it out of fear of, oh my God, if I do this, then they will do this, and then this will lead to this, and then all of these things, right? We don't want to do that because things don't function if we do things out of fear. So if we do things out of fear, it would be like, I really want to work on, I really don't want to work on weekend, but if you need me, I can be available, of course, so don't worry. I will just, you just let me know, and then we'll figure something out. So I just want to tell you that ideally I wouldn't want to work, but if you need me, then yeah, let's see, let's talk about it, right? That would be doing it out of fear. And we don't want that because that's not a boundary. It's a bit like, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not really sure, right? We want the boundary to be like a line, like undisputable. Like think of your house's line, that it's not like someone's gonna come over and say, well, this is not clear. Obviously, I can put my chair and take some part of it, right? Well, it does happen sometimes, but usually that's not the case. So that's the same logic for boundaries. So as long as we keep putting the boundary out of fear, things won't work. So that's why we need that inner freedom to say, it's very important to me. I want to do it this way. And if other people have problems, it's their issue. I can't control other people's problems or their solutions. I'm sure they're grown up enough to find their own solutions, but this is how I want to do things. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's why inner freedom is so important. And then in that line of feelings, you can absolutely put the worthy in there, or deserving, whichever the way that feels to you is, you deserve this because you want to be true to how you are or who you are, right? You want to be true to who you are instead of keep generating the feeling of resentment because you didn't say the things that you really wanted to say. Or you just keep generating or showing up differently than you actually are, and then feel really pissed when other people don't really see who you are. So that's why let's put that worthy and deserving in there as well as a requirement as to how you could be setting boundaries. Now, the next step is the action, obviously, and this is key because just because we happen to realize this for ourselves or think about it for ourselves, it doesn't mean that other people magically know about it, right? It's not like, I mean, unless we have been doing it for some time, then maybe people know about it. For instance, when I was working in the humanitarian organization, my colleagues always knew that I don't work on weekends. And I don't work after 6 p.m. when the work finishes. If there is an emergency, they can call me, but otherwise I don't work. That's like my boundary. And in order for other people to know, we need to communicate it, right? But in order for us to communicate, we need to also communicate in a way that's coming from a free, honest place of care for ourselves so that we can say it also in that way. So for instance, we don't need to be saying boundaries in a way like, well, you can't do this. If you do this, I will do this, right? We don't do that because that doesn't function, as I said before. So that's why the boundary could always work well if we say, my dear supervisor, naming them that person if you may, say, I have been thinking about it and I have noticed all of what's going on, and I would love to not work on the weekend. And instead, I would like to focus on taking care of myself or doing other things, whatever. You don't even need to explain it if you don't want to. And that's why, can we agree on this? And if not, then if you ask me to work on the weekend, then can we at least agree on what are the emergencies that I will be covering? Otherwise, I just focus on my life, or you can let me know calling. Otherwise, I will not check the emails or whatever it is, right? So you know what are the consequences or how you will present it to the supervisor in a way that's like very coming from a very honest, grounded, calm place of really communicating that this is how I'm wanting to do things, and I would love for you to respect it. Right? That's it. If they don't do that, then you need to have your own consequence for that. And the consequence could be like, if they don't respect and keep calling you, you don't pick up the phone, or if they don't respect that boundary and keep apologizing and saying, well, could you do this anyway? Could you do this anyway? You can then say, no, I won't. And it will be very scary. And it will be like, oh my God, they could fire me. They wouldn't tolerate such behavior. And all of these thoughts and fears will come up. That's okay. You can handle that. You can process that, because this will be the time when you stood by your own principles. This is the time when you make sure that others understood how you want to work. If they don't understand and they have their own issues, it's up to them. But you did communicate, you did request, and if they don't do things the way that you would like them to do, you would like them to respect, then you don't need to be mad at them. You don't need to be like, how could you? I told you, right? No need to spend all of that energy, but instead, no. Yes, I'm feeling fear. Yes, I'm feeling very much uncomfortable, but this is how I want to function, and I would love people to understand that. And if they don't, it's okay. But I will just keep doing things the way I want to and being consistent in doing things the way I want to, because that's how I want to work. This is how I want to take care of myself. This is how I want to ensure that I keep generating energy for the next day, the long run commitment, right? This is how I do. And if others don't want to, absolutely, I understand. Nope, no worries. Right? So that brings me to the result, is where you want to check the result of how that is going and how setting boundaries is making you feel now, except the fear part and discomfort part that appeared because your boss said something else. And notice that standing by your own principles, honoring what you said you would do and doing it, and clearly communicating it and not being vague, and being consistent on it, and doing it out of love for yourself, right? And out of love for the other person. It's important. If you keep doing that out of love for yourself and for the other person, then the results will be so life-changing that you didn't even realize why you didn't do that like years ago. Because I have done it so many times in so many parts of my life. And being honest, especially when we're communicating with other people, may be challenging for some of us. But doing that over and over again, feeling that discomfort when others said, no, you should do this, you should do that, and feeling that discomfort to say, no, I'm sorry, I want to do this way. And respecting yourself for wanting that, respecting yourself for doing that, respecting yourself for just communicating and loving yourself for doing this consistently, doing it honestly, doing it transparently, doing it clearly, right? Doing it only because you want to honor that worthy, amazing person you are. Then I think you are good to go to conquer the world. Okay, my dears, I hope this was helpful. It's a bit over time, but I think you have lots of things to reflect on, decide how to apply and start applying. And of course, you let me know how things are going. And as I said, if you want to work on this more, and if you want me to have a look at your specific situations of how and when things are not working and how would you like to make it work, let me know and invite you to the lab for humanitarians who are transitioning, where we'll be looking at all of this, dissecting, coaching, and getting you back to doing all the things the way you want to. Thank you. See you next Friday or before. Bye.